Mornings with Paul Turton.
Now we're talking.
This is 12:33 ABC Newcastle.
Last week, there was a lot of discussion around Newcastle after some archaeologists were spotted sifting through materials at the site of the old West End Hotel. And being a naturally curious bunch here at the ABC, we immediately wanted to find out more, and we quickly learned about some of Newcastle's archaeological past. And we have known from past digs, of course, at the KFC, for example, the largest KFC, where the Palais night spot used to stand. It's built on top of a 6,000-year-old Aboriginal heritage site where thousands of tools and other artefacts were found. And there was a burial ground called the Honeysuckle Cemetery, originally somewhere around the vicinity where the Ibis Hotel stands today. So what else is there? What other secrets does the city hold? I don't know. That's why we've invited Josh Symons and Jenny Winnett in for a chat. There are a couple of archaeologists from Artefact.
Hello.
Welcome to you both. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
This sounds like a fun day at the office, or out of the office, as the case may be.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
We usually, a lot of our time is actually spent behind a computer screen or buried in books.
Yeah.
At the library.
Yeah.
Yep. Or covered in mud.
You're taking all the shine
you.
off this. Come on. I'm visualising all the little paintbrushes and stuff, doing all that delicate work.
We have those too.
And it's funny because we're talking about the delicate aspect of stuff that begins in many cases with an excavator. You know, that's because often we don't know about the past, and I guess that's your job. You get called in at that stage. Is that right, Jenny?
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's our job, to make sure that these things aren't too unexpected. So whenever something's going on, there's a whole bunch of rules and regulations in place that will require someone like us to come in and do a bit of research and do some mapping and look into what we think could be there and what we think might have impacted on what could be there, and then we can advise accordingly.
Are there telltale signs about the style of building that's being demolished? Were there periods where we just kind of holus bolus just came in over the top of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can often take a year or two sometimes of research and approvals before getting to the sort of demolition phase.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, Jenny.
Yeah. So yes, we will look at what's there now. There's definitely some areas and styles of architecture that we know have probably resulted in a lot more impact. A lot of buildings in the 80s, for example, used big piles, and that's quite fun for us because we know that if the archaeology was there, the piles will have just sort of cut out a little section in it and the archaeology will be retained around it. Whereas if we know a building is dug out a big basement down into the bedrock, it's all gone.
And there were periods, of course, where we didn't care as much about the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I believe a lot of the shell middens in Sydney as well were used to make lime for building construction. So a lot of that history kind of disappeared. But a lot of it is still preserved underneath where we walk every day, where we drive and catch trains. Yeah.
So what's the holy grail of stuff that you can find? It's not about monetary value, is it? It's
No.
It's not gold coins and all the rest of it. It's
They are fun though.
Yeah.
It is nice when you find something like that.
Somebody's massive engagement ring.
I think Newcastle I find really unique actually, because this area, even where this studio is and where the train station is now, and where a lot of your listeners might have noticed archaeologists working in the last week or two, is just the change in the environment over time, over the last 10 or more thousand years, that is preserved beneath where we live and work. So when these sites dig down, that change is a lot of it is still there and still preserved. And the unique thing about this location as well is that it kind of, in some cases, if I can simplify it, as like a sponge cake, I guess. So people might imagine different layers, and that is quite often what we find here. The story of the rivers and the creeks in Newcastle, so the Hunter River, the Throsby Creek, Cottage Creek, over time as the sea levels came up in the last 10,000 years, the way those creeks sort of moved around and and sort of deposited sand and that sort of thing changed, and it kind of built up. And the Awabakal people and the Worimi people, this is their country, that their activities continue during that period. So when we excavate down, we can quite often see evidence of those activities and changes over time. Yep.
Jenny, do you get conditioned to it? Does it take a bit to impress you? Like, for example, finding old cordial bottles under our old weatherboard houses from the Second World War is exciting to, a new homeowner, for example.
Yeah, look, that stuff's still exciting to me. I love that. So I think anything that links you to the people of the past is really exciting. That's why I do archaeology. It's touching something that someone in the past used and might have accidentally lost. That's really emotive and fun for me. So I still enjoy all of that. Even I don't live in a particularly old home at the moment, but it's from the 70s, and the blacksmith used to work on that property, and I find horseshoes everywhere, and I still love it, even though it's my job. But obviously there are finds that you get that are very special.
It's not just about the relics or the artefacts themselves, it's the story that they tell us about how people lived, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So, for example, over at the current train station, Artefact was involved with the Awabakal people in excavating at that location. And we actually found one little unique part of the story of that site was, around 6,000 years ago, there was a land surface, and then there was a sudden change. So we noticed that the soil we were digging became a different color, a different texture. It might be more like a garden soil that your listeners would sort of see in their backyard. And we're kind of what happened here? And so through geomorphology and pollen analysis, that sort of thing, we found that there must have been some sort of event that changed, that sort of blocked off that area, and water actually sat there. And the vegetation changed, and as part of that, we found that the number of artifacts dropped off as well. So there's this change in use. So obviously, as it became swampier, people kind of maybe moved away or didn't use that area in the same way. But then after that, on top of that, it changed again. So these little unique parts of the formation, the history of Newcastle, the history of Awabakal country, is incredible. And a lot of it is, there beneath roads and buildings. Still.
I love the old joke about the volunteer at the museum. Someone comes up and says, "Oh, how old's a dinosaur?" And he says, "Oh, it's 1,019 years." And the patron says, "Oh, that's very precise. What do you use, carbon dating?" He says, No. I've been here for 19 years. When I got here, they told me it was 1,000,000 years old. It's the dating stuff and the timelines, of course, would be the one, being able to put together the pieces of the jigsaw would be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Gratifying, I guess. Yeah. Is it?
Yeah.
I pulled up lino at our old place in Merewether, our first home in Merewether, pulled up the lino over there, and you could virtually tell what week it was laid, because there's the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate from 1913,
Yeah, that's great. Well, we actually have building archaeology as well, which is the study of those layers within a home, wallpaper analysis and things like that. There's even specialists that deal with that.
Yeah.
And people that look at paint, even different layers of paint. So there are specialists also that can, there's a whole variety of techniques. And the Palais site, where the KFC is now, and the Newcastle train station now, some of the dating employed there, that's why as archaeologists we dig very carefully, so that we can take samples to send for various dating techniques. And then as we get higher in the sort of, I guess, in the archaeology, then dating might become, what type of glass bottle, when was that glass manufactured, finding coins, all sorts of things that take a long time to, after the fact, to work through.
Yeah. I imagine you get contradictory evidence from time to time. Someone will dig a pit in the backyard, pile all their rubbish in, and then, sort of 50 years later, it tells a misleading story of what went on there.
Yeah, and that's part of our job, is to unpick that and work out where things sit in we call it the stratigraphy, the stratigraphic context. So things get cut through. And for example, at Wickham that we were just talking about, the beautiful sand deposits, the sponge cake that Josh was talking about, had a big cut right through it. And we were like, what is this? And it turns out that in the early 20th century, it was a big drainage ditch that ran along the railway line. And there's a great resource online called Trove, which has all the digitised old newspapers. You can go through that and find all the local people complaining about this boggy ditch that was always wet and breeding mosquitoes and in the way, and people were dumping their rubbish in it. And in this cut, we were finding bottles, ceramics, skeletal remains of animals. So, that verified what the paper record is telling us, that this ditch was here, it was full of rubbish, people were complaining about it, and eventually they filled it in.
So the rubbish that people were complaining about is actually really interesting to us.
Yeah, my word. Just one last question. Do either of you have a hat and a whip?
Only for special.
Dress up night. Jenny, lovely to meet you. Thanks for coming in. And Josh,
thank you
pleasure to meet you too.
Thank you for having us.
A couple of archaeologists from Artefact working around the inner city locations, of course, where you're seeing building works undertaken